Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. A big story here that the mainstream media is not particularly interested in, and it shows a sign of our times, is that the U.S. administration, the Trump administration, has said that it will not engage Russia on prolonging the New START agreement on limiting the number of nuclear warheads and launchers. And they haven't made it even very clear they want to even get into negotiations. Now, let's be very clear that one of the provisions of the New START agreement is that it can be, if both sides agree at the end, the termination of it, they can automatically renew for 5 years. The U.S. administration is not interested in doing that. Of course, I'm joined by George Szamuely, a partner here at the Gaggle. I think I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. I mean, we grew up with arms control, and it was something that everybody liked. I mean, you could, no matter where you stood on where ideology, and if you were a former immigrant of the Soviet Union, or you're a conservative or you're a lefty, arms control is a pretty good idea because it works, and it did work. And we had, with the end of the Cold War, the end of the Soviet Union, and actually in rapid succession, the U.S. A number of U.S. administrations walked away. The ABM Treaty, the INF Treaty, the Open Skies Treaty, and now the crown jewel of arms control, New START. Kind of give our viewers a reason why we really should be worried and lament this event that was announced on Friday.
Well, I think it is a cause to worry. Just to back up a little bit, what happened here was that the Americans proposed to the Russians an extension of 1 year on the New START treaty in return for a complete freeze on one another's nuclear armory. But what that meant is that they started including within the nuclear armory stuff that wasn't a part of the New START treaty, namely battlefield nuclear weapons. And the Russians said, well, why are you bringing in stuff that isn't really part of the New START treaty? We can have a freeze on everything that's in the New START treaty, but not let's bring in other stuff. So it doesn't look like anything is going to happen. And I think the Trump administration is really hoist by its own petard, because what's happened now is they've let all of the arms control treaties lapse, and Trump, who's supposedly the great negotiator, hasn't got anything in place. I mean, the INF Treaty is gone, the Open Skies Treaty is gone, and now this is about to lapse. And the Russians really have no terrible incentive to negotiate anything with Trump, because the election is in 18 days' time. Trump may be for the birds after the election, and they might actually even get a better deal from an incoming Biden administration, who is more open to arms control than Trump is. However, whatever hostility he has towards Russia, he actually still has that old democratic mentality. Well, arms control is a good thing. And of course, but you're absolutely right in your point, which is that arms control is a good thing. It brings stability and reassures people. I mean, if you've got two hostile powers, as you had during the whole world, the United States and the Soviet Union, and they sit down and sign a comprehensive arms control treaty, well, people are reassured. Well, great, that means we've got something down on paper. They're negotiating. They're going to have to check, whether they're each in compliance with it, and so the possibility of war is postponed into the indefinite future. When you don't have arms control treaties, then people get scared, particularly when in this time the hostility towards Russia, and it's one-sided, the hostility is entirely one-sided, it's coming from the West, particularly from the United States towards Russia, is as intense as it is. And with no arms control agreements there to create stability, then I think the world is a very dangerous place.
Well, and the current administration has had these kind of not so veiled threats that we will outproduce you, we will make you suffer, we'll make you prove to you that you're unable to be in an arms race. But that is missing the point here. And if you've looked at Russian defense positioning, their position papers. It's purely defensive, and they're pouring their money into defense. And this supersonic weapons and all this. I mean, I'm not a tech guy, but it's quite impressive here, and it will be asymmetrical. See, during the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union existed during the Cold War, it was always symmetry, symmetry. That was, that's how I learned the word symmetry, is because of the Cold War. But this will be asymmetrical. So it's really just kind of a fool's errand, because Russia will not react. It will not play that game. Okay. And of course, this is a boon for arms producers in the U.S. Okay. I mean, it's obviously true. I mean, Esper just came out in the last day or so, last news cycle, needing more money because of China and Russia, instead of sitting down and talking about things. I mean, one of the other interesting points here we've had over the last 6 months or so is the U.S. has made a demand for either renewing the New START or even one that would follow it, and it would have to they demand China be at the table. And I don't remember which city at George, was it Vienna or Geneva? It's always one of those two. And they had one of these meetings, and the Americans rather childishly put a Chinese flag at the table, which of course the Chinese were not going to be there. They said they weren't going to be there, and they said, why should we be there? That's between you two countries. And the interesting thing is here, if you think about it logically, and I don't see foreign policy circles in Washington ever thinking logically, is that so if you really want China to sit at the table, so you're basically saying you want China to increase its stockpile of warheads and launchers, so they can be a peer with Russia and the United States. I mean, they just don't think these things out, do they? No, I think the world should, and it's not being naive, should try to get rid of all of these weapons here. But one side is not going to capitulate to the other. You have to do it like we have seen for 40, 50 years of arms control. Verification, trust but verify. Ronald Reagan was right.
Well, that's the thing. If you are going to bring in other powers, then obviously the Russians are going to raise the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is, well, what about the United Kingdom and France?
What about Israel?
They are clearly allies of the United States, and they have intermediate-range nuclear weapons. I mean, they weren't included in the INF treaty, but nonetheless, those are missiles that are targeting Russia. And so, the Russians would say, yeah, okay, fine, let's bring in all the nuclear powers, and let's have a comprehensive nuclear disarmament agreement, but we need to bring in the United Kingdom and France. But that's, no one ever raises that issue. And remember, the INF treaty was never really in Russia's favor. It was a very disadvantageous treaty. The Russians were so eager at that time to sign these kinds of agreements, whatever the mentality of Gorbachev was. They signed something that clearly worked in favor of the United States, because it never touched the submarine-based missiles, which are always in America's advantage. It only affected the land-based missiles, where the Soviet Union had advantage. So, and of course, it didn't touch the UK and France. So, yeah, I mean, these kinds of agreements. And then it's the United States that walked away from the INF treaty, which really was never in their interest. But you're right. I mean, the point about Russia being defensive is that these strategic missiles, I mean, the whole point of having these strategic missiles is that it's the second strike capability. I mean, they're entirely defensive. In other words, you've got something in your arsenal should anything terrible happen. All the other types are, there's always a sense that they may be offensive, like, battlefield nuclear weapons. It's hard to justify using battlefield nuclear weapons. I mean, other than they are offensive weapons. I mean, they're to be used in offensive warfare. So, you can see, yes, the Russians are always concerned with, their own defense capability. That's why they were so concerned, and I have been concerned since the 1980s with the ballistic missile defense system. Again, because it was a way of getting rid of the source of strategic stability, which was second strike capability. It was a way that somehow now the United States would gain a unilateral advantage over the Soviet Union and would be able to wage a war against the Soviet Union they could win. Of course, it caused panic and alarm in the Soviet Union and Russia now.
Well, and the interesting thing is that with the end, the termination of the New START treaty, we're going to enter for the first time, I think, roundly 50 years of not having these kinds of negotiations and kind of institutions, as it were. That's a really scary thought, George. It's a really scary thought because when all this started, there were very few nuclear powers. Now there are quite a few, okay? And instead of working to a comprehensive one that would include like India and Pakistan and Israel, we're getting further and further away from it when we should actually be running towards it. And what kind of arms negotiators does the U.S. have right now? We haven't negotiated an agreement for years, okay? Exactly. It's like getting out of practice in a way, okay? And I find that really, really dangerous. And what I would say to people that think like us, you can have an America First policy, but you can also, have on the sidebars, this is an area where it has to have a universal appeal, and because it gives everyone the same security benefits. It's this win-lose mentality. It doesn't work with these kind of negotiations. But by their very definition, they have to be win-win.
That's right. And where you have America first and it leads to strategic instability, that's a very serious business. So you can have, yes, a president of the United States, his job is to ensure the security of the American people. Well, you don't ensure the security if you allow for an uncontrolled arms race, because an uncontrolled arms race at the time of considerable hostility between the two great nuclear powers is a very dangerous affair. I mean, we saw what happened in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world got absolutely terrified. This created the impetus for the great arms control treaties of the late 60s and 1970s, which was, we don't want to go back to what happened in 1962. I mean, because the world really came to the brink. And now we could be heading towards another, Cuban Missile Crisis.
One of the interesting things, we obviously date ourselves and we talk about these things, but when you think of the first SALT agreement, what was going on? The United States was bombing Hanoi, an ally of the Soviet Union, okay? But the Soviets still sat down and said, we will negotiate on this. But, they were at each other's throats when it came to proxy wars around the world. But both sides had the wisdom to say, you can't let this get out of control. You can win or lose in the Sudan or Angola or Vietnam, but you can't, if one loses in this realm, we all lose. And that was the wisdom of negotiators, and that wisdom is lost.
That's right. And what was also important, yes, the United States was bombing Hanoi, Haiphong at the very moment when Nixon was sitting down in Moscow to sign that agreement. However, the Russians were helping the Americans. They were helping America to get out of Vietnam. I mean, they were leaning on Hanoi, basically just cut it out, let America withdraw. And I think that also is lost today, which is the Biden people who think, well, we can just sign an arms control agreement while we're imposing sanctions on Russia, while we're expanding NATO, while we're having military exercises in the Baltic and in the Black Sea, but we can still sign an agreement. No, it's a package. If you're going to have arms control agreement, you have to have mutual cooperation. I think that was something that took place in the 70s, and we're very far away from that now.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're in the worst of all possible worlds. We have an administration that is just unwilling to entertain arms control, and then you have a potential new administration in January that is wedded to ideas back of the 1970s or even 60s. Okay, doesn't bode well, George. But I'm really glad we did this. I'm going to keep an eye on it. The Gaggle's going to keep an eye on this because arms control is important. It's popular and it works. Okay, if you give it a chance. Okay, thank you, George. If you like this, like, share, and subscribe. And of course, we have a busy week ahead of us.